Welcome to the Ashes preview podcast, gentlemen. And I suppose I'd like to start by asking what do we think of the situation in which Australia currently find themselves? For us, I hope it's good news.
Great fun today, wasn't it? Those people who've seen the result, you know the result from Melbourne today? No. Don't you know that? No. One day international, Australia 229, I think, for 8. 239 was it? For 8 from their 50 overs. Sri Lanka 124 for 8. Win by 1 wicket.
Is it a delightful score?
So it's a belter, yeah. It continues the role. It's a difficult one.
Malinga's underestimated
as a batter. I don't think Angelo Matthews is there, is he? No. Serious point. They're on that's 8 games now where they haven't won an international match of any description. And I haven't done the research on this, but I would suggest you have to go back a long, long way to find that kind of run from an Australian team.
Victor, how do you feel about this?
Well, I'm quite optimistic. I don't think I'm quite as optimistic as Selv, in that I still think there's a huge barrier about England playing in Australia. They've been so hopeless and have so underperformed for at least 2 decades. We always go to South Africa and we play well. We don't necessarily win, but we compete. And we haven't done that in Australia for a long time. So I can buy the fact that if you look at the teams man for man, you could easily have England as the stronger side. But I still think there's that big leap to make about coping with everything that Australia throws at you from the moment you land in the airport and start reading the papers and talking to the bloke at customs or whatever. So that's the barrier, I think, rather than a problem with Dougie Bollinger's little bit of nip or Hilton House's away swing. That's not a major problem, I would have thought, for good English professionals. But there's the whole thing about coping in Australia, which we've signally failed to do for a long time.
How big a deal is it psychologically being in Australia, or even just playing against Australia?
Looking at me.
Yes, looking and still wondering what really I should be calling you.
Yeah.
Mike,
You should.
What do colleagues / patients call you?
Colleagues. All sorts of things. But patients, they usually only have me in the room, so they don't have to name me, usually. Australia, well... it is. They are in your face, and there's no question about it. And I remember the first time we arrived at Perth. It was. We'd just come from India and Sri Lanka, and in India and Sri Lanka there were people who carried your bags. They weren't in Perth. and they, it was only about 10 seconds before the word Lily had crossed their lips. So there is that, as Vic says, and I remember when Packer started and they started to have as a sort of foretaste for the Ashes series, which we were playing concurrently, they had pictures of people being sort of poleaxed and hit on the head, and the violence was quite in the forefront. So I think Vic's right. I mean, you go there and you know that all the time. People are saying that you're no good and they're terrific, and it doesn't matter what's happened in the last 6 months or whatever. But I agree, we've got a terrific chance, despite this factor. And I think that probably there's enough of them have been there and have sort of tasted what it's like to lose in Australia, to know that they don't want to do it like that again. I mean, it must have been a very miserable experience last time.
I went to Australia for about 2 weeks earlier this year, and being in Australia, if you're English, it's a bit like being in a really long argument that you're winning that just won't stop. It's an almost unbearable place to pass any time.
You weren't even playing cricket.
In terms of how the squads match up, then, how do you feel, Mr. Brearley, or Dr. Brearley, or Archbishop Brearley? How do you?
I've only just met him.
It is a bit over-familiar calling someone Archbishop. Absolutely overstepped the boundaries
just after
there.
you met him.
Yeah. How do you feel at the squads matchup? I mean, say for
I
instance,
wanted to go back to your question about the albatross, because as the ancient mariner, I wanted to say that, that you could never actually...
One in three.
Yeah, but you'd never want not to have Flintoff playing. I mean, he is such a good cricketer. You miss him, and they do miss him. I mean, I think so. You can have 5 bowlers rather than 4, and that's going to be a problem if they're flat wickets, and if somebody gets after Swan, they're going to have a very, very hard time, because they're going to have 3 bowlers who are going to have to bowl too much, and they're going to get tired, and they're going to get injured, and that seems to me the crucial thing is in the field. Is Swan going to be able to bowl on hot days and flat pitches? Is he going to be able to bowl 30 overs and take 2 or 3 for 90, or is he going to, are they going to get after him? And they have to. Everything then goes wrong with a 4-man attack if you can't rely on your spinner on a flat wicket. So I think that's the key thing. So what did you ask me?
Well, no, I can keep that on hold.
I should say you asked him that.
Oh yeah, exactly that question, Reverend Mother.
Question about the art of captaincy. Mike Brearley, if our host will allow me to call him that,
A gentleman in the audience.
has said that he rates Andrew Strauss at least as highly as Ricky Ponting, and perhaps more highly, and has said that he thinks that Ricky Ponting is a better motivator than a tactician, if I understood correctly. I wonder how the panel as a whole see the respective merits, characteristics of the two captains, and how that's likely to play out this Australian summer.
No, I said
you've said your piece.
I said my
Well, I more or less agree with you, Michael. I mean, I don't think Strauss is a brilliant tactician, but I think he's a very calm person, and in a way that, particularly over this next 2 or 3 weeks before it actually gets started, there's this desperate, terrible, really phony war, and there'll be all sorts of stories in the press, and people will be getting very animated. There'll be stuff written in Australia, might be stuff written over here, that'll get everyone's gander up. It actually means nothing at all. And I suspect that Strauss is sufficiently mature as a bloke and sufficiently calm just to put all that to one side. And also, once the series gets underway, and there's going to be huge interest, be fantastic. But I think he's quite good at withdrawing, remaining calm, concentrating on what he has to do, and not get carried away by the whole sort of razzmatazz of an Ashes series. So that's encouraging. I don't think he's a genius, but he's very solid as a captain. I think he's probably got better.
To go back to Ponting, he's under quite a bit of pressure. I mean, they don't like losing very much in Australia, and they're losing some matches, as people said earlier on. He's 35. He's probably not quite as good a player. Probably not quite as good a batsman as he was. England are probably slightly better bowling side than they were. So, if we get a good start, if we get that first ball, Collingwood bowls the dot ball. if we do that, and if we get Ponting out for 1 or 2 lowish scores, he doesn't get 183, and he's going to struggle. And shall I say something about Vaughan, since we seem to be talking about Vaughan? I thought Vaughan was a very good captain and a very inventive one. I thought at the end he became over-inventive, and suddenly you had 2 short mid-wickets and a short extra cover, and they looked like ornamental positions to me, as if the exception had become the rule almost. But I agree with what they were saying about the professionals over there, were saying about Monty. At least I agree that it seemed as though watching Monty bowl, which I did once or twice, for example, in Sri Lanka, he seemed... And I think the Sri Lankans, by the way, had taken a policy against him, and that he went for 20 in his first over in Sri Lanka, and they'd made a definite... They thought he wouldn't be as good a bowler if they went after him. And so in a non-test match, they went for 20 in his first over. And I think he lost a bit of confidence. And then nobody really seemed to be talking to him about... He was almost standing at the back of his run, looking at where the field was going to be, He wasn't involved in the decision. And I remember a test match in which of all great slow bowlers, Underwood at Calcutta, Tony Greig, who was a good captain, but just for a short while, somebody hit Underwood for 3 or 4 fours, and suddenly Greggy was standing there pointing fielders in different directions, and unders. Do you remember it?
Yes, I do.
He was covered in sweat and dust and and red, and he was standing at the back with his feet pointing out, looking at these fielders going to different parts of the ground. And the great bowler Underwood, I mean, he was a great bowler, was reduced actually by that. So I think, I'm sorry I didn't offer Selvers in the end more often, but captains can reduce bowlers, or certainly not build them up. And I agree with what they say. I haven't seen a sign, but I haven't seen enough, but I haven't seen a sign of Ponting really bringing the best out of people who are having a slightly hard time. And I think Strauss is more likely to do that.